Hello and welcome back to Living on Purpose. I'm Dr. Allison Brumley, a naturopathic physician, and I'm here with my co-host, Karen Cox, who's the amazing health and wellness coach. And today's topic is going to be one of my personal favorites. We're really going to talk about how to use herbs in helping with hormonal balance, and it's really nature's pharmacy. These herbs have been used for thousands and thousands of years. And they do, to a certain extent, have a medicinal property. Now, they're always going to be a little less than the pharmaceutical options. They're gentle. They're typically more balancing than having a really strong effect, whether you're talking about estrogen, testosterone, cortisol, DHEA, testosterone, all of those. You can be affected by herbs, whether you want them higher or lower. And so in using the herbs, you're using them for a longer period of time. And sometimes it might be forever based on what condition you've been diagnosed with. And sometimes it could be a short period of time. As you've talked to people, how do you feel like their knowledge of herbs is? Do they use them just on their own?
I don't think people have a great knowledge on herbal remedies, but people are excited to learn about them. I'm excited for this episode because, we've been in practice together and we've worked with women in balancing hormones, and you're always bringing up these herbs. So I'm excited to learn a little bit more about those properties and how they're actually helping to balance. And I think that's what our listeners would really be interested in today is, for instance, how does Chasteberry work?
Mm-hmm. It's a big one.
Yeah, and some of those others. So I'm just going to give you some time to go into those herbs and how they work to balance the body.
Herbs are amazing, and it can be really hard to do it wrong. Like you brought up Chasteberry. I oftentimes use that within a seed cycling program. The seed cycling, the first 2 weeks is really geared toward nourishing and balancing the estrogen. And then the second 2 weeks is about nourishing and balancing the progesterone. And Chasteberry, also known as Vitex, they're two words for the exact same herb. It works really on the luteinizing hormone in the brain, in the pituitary, not really the brain, but the pituitary. And then it helps the body ovulate. It helps the body make more progesterone and can really be helpful with fertility, with creating a regular menstrual cycle. So I'll do that a lot in women who have been diagnosed with PCOS or PMDD. It's really as close as you can get to nature's progesterone without doing progesterone replacement. So I use it in all of those conditions. I love the herb maca.
Okay.
That maca root that you had mentioned is really balancing for estrogen and progesterone. So
it works on both of them.
Mm-hmm. And maca, I will say this with Chasteberry too, is that neither of those do you take during a pregnancy. They can help with fertility, but once you're pregnant, you don't take those herbs. But maca is a little more stimulatory than Vitex, but very balancing. And so I'll see women and have women take maca whether they're young or through menopause.
Mm-hmm.
Like it can be really helpful through those perimenopausal, menopausal times. Another one that's very good is dong quai. We say that in Chinese medicine. You may see it as dong quai.
Okay.
So it's the same herb, whether it's dong quai, dong quai. And it's very blood building. It's a big menopausal herb, but it can also be really good for women who bleed really heavy because it can build blood, even thinking about anemia. If those iron levels go down, very likely still need to take some iron, but the dong quai is very nourishing that way. And then during menopause will help with hot flashes and can do things like that. Black cohosh, that's another herb, very well known for menopause and hot flashes. There's a lot of research behind it. It's the safest herb for women who've had breast cancer because it can still support the hot flashes and low estrogen, but it's not estrogenic in nature.
Okay.
So it can safely be taken. It's not taken through a pregnancy. I rarely do that for young women, but it can be helpful at the end of pregnancy to prep for childbirth. Oh. So it's one of those. Another thing with black cohosh is that it's a very good muscle reliever. And so, you have a lot of muscle tension, you get headaches, and it just relaxes. It's more of that muscle relaxant, which is, I think, why it's good at the end of pregnancy. Mm-hmm. You're getting that uterus, which is just this huge, strong muscle, to just relax a little bit, and as it just preps for delivery.
Relax all the perineum and all of that. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very good. Another herb would be red raspberry. Red raspberry is one that's very good from the time you're young to way postmenopausal. Red raspberry is one of those that can be used for fertility. It helps regulate that estrogen-progesterone cycle, so it works a little bit on both. So whereas the chasteberry, I just have women do it the second half of the cycle, from ovulation to the next menstruation, red raspberry can be taken all month long. And then red raspberries, very safe through pregnancy, and then very good postpartum. So in Latin, the name is rubus idaeus, and so you might see it with that. I'll see it, with a label of rubus idaeus, and people would say, "What's that? What's that?" They should have somewhere on there that it's red raspberry leaf,
and it's very strengthening for the uterus. The red raspberry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's why it's good to take all through a pregnancy, because it strengthens the uterus.
Yeah. My favorite line of tea formulas is traditional medicinals.
Okay.
And they have one for pregnancy. It's got red raspberry in it. And they have one for lactation. They make a lot of very nice formulas. And that would be another thing to talk about, is how to take herbs.
Yeah. So when you were just talking about red raspberry leaf tea, it's made from the raspberry plant leaf. And so how do you take it?
You can find it a lot of different ways, as you can most herbs. And I just really like patients, for the most part, it doesn't necessarily matter what form it's in. The teas are going to be the most dilute, have the least amount of medicinal effect, which is really why teas are so good through pregnancy. You don't want to take a lot of anything, but they're very gentle. And so if you like tea, some people don't. They do not like tea. Because I'll say you don't have to drink it hot. You could mix it up, put it in the fridge, pour it over ice, make an ice drink if you don't like warm drinks. But their teas are probably the ones to start with if you're just getting into it, because they're easy. Then you've got just the powdered herb that they'll put in capsules.
Okay.
Just swallow a capsule, and in most cases you're just following what it says on the label. Just what should you be taking of that? And then there's tinctures. Tinctures are alcohol extracts, and they come in liquid dropper bottles. And I would just dose it to what the manufacturer recommends. Tinctures are the strongest. That they're usually alcohol extracts. Alcohol, if you soak an herb in alcohol, it helps pull out those medicinal properties that are so beneficial for us. And it makes it the strongest.
A stronger medicine.
A stronger medicine. And then they also will do it in a glycerin for people who don't want to do and have any alcohol in it. The alcohol and the glycerin, to a certain extent, also act as a preservative. So most of those, even though they're liquid, they're not kept in the fridge. They're usually fine to just be out room temperature in a cupboard on the counter, and they're good for a long time. They just don't go bad.
So how would somebody go about finding a good source? Because I'm sure that's important.
It is. That a lot of times you can look at reviews, but sometimes that doesn't tell you everything you need to know. And the best ones are really the legitimate brands. And you can typically find that as you look online, which ones come up the first in an advertisement aren't always the best. If you're getting loose herbs, there are companies that doctors have always bought from. Like I buy a lot of my herbs from Mountain Rose or Pacific. There are a number of good herbals from them. If you're buying a tincture, you've got Herb Farm, Gaia Herbs. Those are very well known. For many, many years, only physicians could get them. They didn't sell them just to the general public. But now almost everybody sells everything to the general public. And so they're easy to get. The tinctures, there can still be a lot of other really good ones. I'll look at companies like Just Ingredients or Gleeful or Mixers. Those are some that are withstanding the test of time, that women take them, they notice a difference. And that's the main thing too. That would be another thing is does it make a difference in your health? If it's not, you either need to take more or switch it up and do something different. And I'll give anything 3 months to make a difference. Take it for 3 months. If it doesn't make a difference, switch it up. Even thinking about herbs that we use more for adrenal function, sometimes also have a benefit on your estrogen and progesterone and testosterone. Licorice root would be one of those. Licorice root, they'll put that in teas, and it's a very common, probably the most common ingredient in Chinese formulas of herbs. And so licorice root will lower testosterone levels, so it can be good for women who have PCOS and break out with acne. You can use licorice root, from young to postmenopausal. It helps increase the half-life of cortisol. Oh. So then your adrenal glands don't have to work so hard to keep your cortisol levels where they're helpful for balancing and regulating your blood sugar. And women with PCOS need that too. It's the insulin resistance that drives that. So if they end up with some hypoglycemia issues, licorice root's a wonderful herb. You cannot take licorice root while you're pregnant, or at least not very high doses, because it can increase blood pressure.
Okay.
So, sometimes we think, oh, herbs are just herbs. And even though I say, yeah, you do low amounts and they don't have a huge medicinal effect, sometimes they do. And it's nice to follow those cautions.
So to check with a practitioner that knows how to use herbal remedies. If you were to recommend a book for somebody to read, is there some books out there that are good for the layman to read about herbal remedies and herbal medicine?
Mountain Rose Herbs that I just mentioned, you can buy loose herbs from. They make a book on herbal treatments and balancing women's hormones. And you can just get that off their website as you're looking at the herbs they have. The loose herbs, you can decide how to eat those too or drink those. Most of the time you get a tea ball and put the herb in the tea ball, and then you can still steep it in water. And sometimes you can use a little more than you just get in the tea bag, and it can save you a little money. If you buy a pound of something, it will last you for quite a while. Usually the dosing on the teas are typically a teaspoon per cup of water.
Okay. And we can also use those loose herbs for cooking, making soups and stews and in our cooking to help get some of those into our diet as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that would take me back to even thinking about herbs like parsley. Parsley has a little bit of an estrogenic effect. But there are herbs for hormones where you're really thinking about, ooh, do I have too much estrogen? How does my liver metabolize estrogen? Because you make hormone every day, and then it goes through the liver, and then it needs to go out of the body in one way or another. So whether that's the urine, the stool, there's always this important element of detoxification and getting rid of it. So constipation is probably one of the worst things to have when you're trying to get rid of hormone. And the estrogen can just recirculate if it's not passing out through the stool. And then you get more of those estrogen dominant symptoms of irritability, breast tenderness. Those are probably the two biggies. And the irritability part can be huge, where women are just like, I can't help myself. I can't stop myself.
Can't. So let's talk about the herbs that really help the liver and help the digestive system so we don't get bogged down.
Part of that in the liver, you've got phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 of detoxification. Most people do phase 1 pretty well. There can be some genetics at play with that and just liver health in general. But phase 1 is a water-soluble process, and most bodies do that really well. For phase 2, you have a conjugation where the estrogen is going to bind to a conjugate, which is an amino acid that you get from protein. So having women eat plenty of protein, they can do that. The third part is bile. And that phase 3 is, do you have good bile flow? And the bile helps really with fats and fatty acids. And that's really what we're talking about when we have hormones, is that they're a steroid, which has some fat. It's made out of cholesterol. And so if you want to support those, number 1, eat plenty of protein. And there's protein in plants, thinking about your spices. And women need at least 45 grams of protein every day. That's your bare minimum. I like women to get about 80 milligrams in every day. Women that are doing macros can go all the way up to 140 milligrams, which can be difficult to keep your hormones balanced with that much protein. So it's kind of interesting. The best herbs would be dandelion root.
Okay.
And there's traditional medicinals makes a couple of those dandelion tea bags formulas. It's the root part that is the best in the liver, and the leaf part is the best in the kidneys. So it doesn't hurt to do a little bit of both of those types of dandelion as you think about the detoxification process. Other roots that really work well, burdock root is amazing. Milk thistle, that's a flower, and it can help regenerate the liver. So it helps with all of that. But dandelion and burdock are probably my two favorite to really help support the detoxification process of the liver.
And when I always think of liver and herbs, I think bitter. It's those bitter herbs that are really helping to cleanse in the liver to do its part. So they're not always the easiest to get in because they're bitter, but they're really good for us.
Yeah. The first plant that came to my mind with that is arugula, which can grow abundantly in just about any type of soil. And it's a spring plant. So it kind of takes me back to thinking about, that's most abundant in the spring and the summer. But then other bitter herbs, they actually make bitter formulas that help with the whole digestive process, from creating enough stomach acid to break down your proteins in your food, and then pancreatic enzymes that break all of those down, and as well as supporting the way the liver functions.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's move into talking about some of those, the fats that our body needs, like through evening primrose or and how that works.
So that takes me back to that seed cycling idea. And the fats, as I've mentioned, are really how we make hormones. We need plenty of fat to make the hormone. So the first 2 weeks, the fat that you need the most is that omega-3 from fatty fish. So very easy to find omega-3 supplements, but if you burp them or if they smell rancid, they're worse to take than not take. So you do have to be somewhat picky with buying those omega-3s. There are some good brands out there that do a good job so that those fatty acids don't turn rancid. That's the worst thing for that. But they really help with that estrogen part of the cycle. You release the FSH out of the pituitary gland. It goes to the ovary, helps the ovary develop a follicle. And the omega-3 helps with all of that. And then the GLA oils are very well known for helping women with the progesterone part of the cycle and helping women who are going into menopause and even perimenopause that get some hot flashes and night sweats. So your GLA oils can come from evening primrose. That particular oil has the most research on it. The other oil that's high in GLA is borage oil. And both of those plants, borage is a little higher in the GLA, so you usually need to take less. But again, the research is mostly done on evening primrose. But it can be very good from young women just starting their menstrual cycle all the way to postmenopausal.
So these are actual oils that come from the plant.
Yeah, they extract it from the seed, typically the seed, or the flower portion of that. If you've borage can be a huge plant. I've grown borage before, and you can put the leaves in your salads too. Like the whole things, they make big leaves too.
Okay.
So really plant medicine, which I think is so good.
Yeah, and even just thinking about everyday use, getting yourself a little herbal garden. Herbs can grow inside as well as outside, and using those clippings in your food. I know that even cilantro is really great for the liver as a plant.
Yeah.
And so that's one way that we can get those in just in our everyday is being mindful of those herbs in green color. And
yeah, they can be grown in an outside plot or in a pot. They need lots of light, and that's about it. Some of them are a little more temperamental with how much you water them or how much you don't, but they all need a lot of light. So that would be the main thing. The other thing that I wanted to talk about, the category of herbs that can be so helpful for hormone balancing, would be the herbs that are adaptogens. And we use those for mostly stress. And because our lifestyles incorporate so many stressful things these days, that sometimes that's better than any of those other balancing herbs. If you can reduce your stress, you're more likely to regulate your hormones better. So I think of herbs like ashwagandha is really probably the master herb for stress. It's a nightshade, and so some people who can't do nightshades don't do really well on ashwagandha, but the majority of people do really well with that. I mentioned licorice. Licorice, I would say, where it increases the half-life of cortisol would be another big one that can help with hormonal balance. And there's rhodiola. One of my favorites is holy basil. It doesn't have much of a hormonal component to it other than being that adaptogen that just helps the body adapt to stressors.
Okay. Even it helps the body adapt to the stressor of high blood sugar. I refer to it as Tulsi tea, but that's holy basil.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's one of my favorite teas.
It's one of my favorites.
Yeah.
It's a little sweet, so the majority of people do like it. It's pretty easy to drink as a tea. But again, you can get it in a capsule or in a liquid tincture.
Any other in that category that you did we get them all?
No, there's a lot.
Okay.
Schizandra.
Okay.
That we use that quite a bit in Chinese herbal formulas
That's a
as
new
well.
one I haven't heard about.
Yeah.
So.
Very good for the adrenal glands, and as a tincture, it's very bitter.
Okay.
It's very bitter. It's not very good in a tincture. But if I'm making up a tincture, I'll throw a little bit in there, but it's the smallest amount of any of the herbs that go in it.
Okay.
Licorice makes it a little sweet, and then the ashwagandha or the schizandra is just bitter.
So it sounds like it's a powerful herb.
It is.
But
It is. You don't need a lot of it, but very, very balancing for the body. Another herb that I think of is saw palmetto for balancing hormones. Now, if you do a search on saw palmetto, it'll most likely come up with issues of prostate health for men, and because it can help with that. But saw palmetto, why it is so helpful is it can downregulate the enzyme that turns testosterone into dihydrotestosterone. And so for women who have PCOS, may have more of an issue with that just in general because they have a tendency to make more testosterone anyway.
Okay.
And then you get the acne, and you can get some hair loss. And so saw palmetto slows down that enzyme so you don't make as much dihydrotestosterone. So it can really help with the hair loss. If you look at some of the hair loss formulas, you can just buy, the majority of them have saw palmetto in it. And saw palmetto, schizandra, and chasteberry are probably the worst tasting.
Okay.
And so to take them as a tincture,
Better in a
either have
capsule.
to mix it with something, way better in a capsule. And I don't know that I've ever used saw palmetto in a tea. I don't know that I typically see it because it does not taste good. You know, some of those others, it can take a little while to get used to taking herbs, drinking herbal teas, and because they taste like grass or weed or dirt or, those things. So
Very earthy.
There can be a little adjustment. And for, the people that just absolutely have such an aversion to that, you're better off doing a capsule.
Okay. So maybe to wrap up this episode, where's a good place for our listeners to start?
If you've had a diagnosis of PMS, PCOS, PMDD, all of those, the seed cycling with the chasteberry and the omega-3 and the GLA is really the best place to start. It can take a few months. They're not really fast acting. And, based on how mild, moderate, severe your symptoms are, is really how helpful is it going to be. But it is one of those foundational protocols that I put a lot of women on. I've had some women who are in their perimenopausal years and where they start skipping periods or bleed heavy or stop having a cycle at all. We'll start the seed cycling, and then the periods will be more regular until they actually are through that menopausal time. So getting some chasteberry, one of the best things. And then because we have such an issue with infertility as well, red raspberry, chasteberry, those are just amazing. And then if you're stressed, look at some ashwagandha. It's lovely.
Well, that's really great ideas and suggestions. So as we wrap this up, let's have you pick one of those. We will put our link to seed cycling again in this episode. It's very effective. A lot of women really like the seed cycling. And then maybe try a new tea. Try the Tulsi tea or the red raspberry leaf tea and see how your body does with tea. See how your taste buds do, and see if you can start enjoying a little bit of tea. Even try some chamomile tea in the evening. And like and subscribe and keep living on purpose.